Salutations, Shades, and welcome back to your one-stop shop for all things strange and unusual, talking with shadows. The conversation everyone has, but no one wants to admit to. Here with your host, Vic Whaley.
And Marcus D. And welcome back, guys. And we want to give a big shout-out to one of our most favorite fans, Avis Rex, the Dark Phoenix, for his fantastic artwork that he did for the Indiana Mud Mermaids episode that we did last time.
Oh, yeah, I love so much of his work. He just posts, we gave him, a little, fan art section, and he just fills it, and I absolutely adore it.
It's great, and it's needed, too, because there's not a whole lot of artwork done about the Indiana Mud Mermaid. If you guys seen some of our earlier work, which there's, photos going up all the time, I would have been having a real hard time finding anything, and I thought that he did a very, very, very fantastic job, and that's a great job, Dark Phoenix.
Do you have a favorite Avis Rex?
One that he did, the Indiana Mud Mermaid that he did. That or the awesome artwork that he did for today's episode as well, because there's also not a lot of good artwork as well for Entombed live animals as well.
He did a kind of aquatic themed chupacabra looking creature, and that is by far, hands down, my favorite. Yeah. I absolutely adore it.
So good, big props to you. Thank you so much. We appreciate it so much, man. We appreciate that so much. And for today, Vic has got us acting like a bunch of basic white, because this is not the Pillow Talk, so Ben can't swear, but we are drinking Smirnoff Ice, red, white, and berry.
Well, I figured this is probably going to go up around the 4th of July, and I'm like, what's Green's 4th of July more than a bomb pop? And these are alcoholic, so why not?
Alcohol. Let me try these alcoholic bomb pops. Cheers to y'all for listening. Hope you guys are having a good 4th.
Oh, they're pretty good.
It does. That actually tastes a lot like an alcoholic bomb pop. That's actually not too bad, yeah.
Yeah, I've had one once before because one of our friends, this was the only thing she would drink. You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's tasty. Oh, that hits the spot.
And joining us in the studio today is Ellie. And by joining us in the studio, I mean she's actually present in the studio. She's not participating with us.
She wouldn't.
But I just want you to know she is here.
She wouldn't come over here and record and play with us, Ellie. Thank you so much. There's sarcasm about it. She's not. You know what? This is where I parked my car. I might need to leave before she shanks me. Anyway, this is phenomenal alcohol, Vic. Great. Good for you. Good job.
Nice back pedal there. Nice back pedal.
Absolutely. Moving right along. Let's get into some comments that we had for our last episode. If you didn't check out our last episode, we talked about the Indiana Mud Mermaids. This really cool mermaid story from southern Indiana that was from the early 19th century. Absolutely go check it out. So, first comment we got comes to us from Creepy California. Super duper fan. Creepy California says, another great video on topic, guys. Maybe it was a large beaver with a skin condition or disease.
Yeah, I did consider that one as well. I thought otter fitted a little closer, but beaver was something else I did heavily consider. Mm-hmm. The one thing that made me steer away from beaver is they have those scaled tails that I figured someone probably would have pointed that part out, but it is definitely something I thought over.
You know you can eat beaver tail?
You can eat most proteins.
I didn't, I was watching one of those, it was like MasterChef, and a dude cooked beaver tail. I didn't even realize, I just saw that and it reminded me of that. I just thought that was the craziest thing ever.
I wonder, is it good?
No, we didn't get on the show.
Oh.
So I don't think so. All right.
I would try it.
Yeah. Katenri McKay says, this makes me think of that story, the green-clawed beast. Eyebrow raised. This was in the Ohio River as well. Lady was attacked, and she swore she could feel fingers wrapped around her ankle, pulling her underwater. She had deeds cut all over her leg and figured this was a bluish-colored mud. And she had cuts on her leg, and there was this bluish-colored mud or clay all over her.
Interestingly enough, that is what we talked about in the Pillow Talk segment. That is exactly what we went into. So we went to the exact same point. The green-clawed beast was actually just a few miles from where we're recording right now.
Yeah.
That was actually here like just outside of Evansville.
We've been there. We've seen it. We've seen the area.
We've seen the area. I wouldn't say we've seen it.
No, we've seen
the area
where this has happened. My advice: go during the day.
Yeah, no, it is a little bit of a rough area, and if you drive around there at night, some weird things will happen. People will follow you around. Just go watch some of our early episodes, and you'll find out about it.
Yeah. The Dark Phoenix said, paleontologists are bad drawers. Vic, I'm hurt. How could you? How dare you? My heart, ow.
Oh, crud. I didn't know you were a paleontologist. You're an awesome drawer.
You were just out there hurting our fans' feelings, Vic. How dare you?
I didn't know. I'm sorry. I apologize to the field of paleontology.
Just calling them bad artists. Grade 9438 said, interestingly enough, there have been reports from the British Columbia of large alligator-like creatures in various lakes and rivers throughout the 1900s. Since it's far too cold for a population of alligators to exist in this area, perhaps they're actually seeing an unknown species of giant salamander that exists in areas where large reptiles are absent.
Oh, that makes so much sense and is such an amazing idea. I was not aware of this, but this is really neat. I'm going to try to look into this. Because there were actually mini amphibians, early amphibians that were large and could be easily mistaken for alligators because they had a very similar body type. There were actually some, if I say caiman, Marcus, do you know what I mean?
Caiman? That's a type of alligator.
Yeah, it's those ones with the really long, thin jaw.
Yes, I knew that. Thank you very much, Indianapolis Zoo.
And it's like optimal for catching fish. And some of these early amphibians had the exact caiman mouth.
Right.
So like them being mistaken for alligators is definitely something that could easily happen. Also, a lot of them didn't just have skin like modern day salamanders. Many of them actually had scales. So this could easily be a thing.
Well, yeah. Well, I think what Gray is getting at is that idea that we talked about in the episode, where maybe they were seeing a species they just didn't understand, and they just sort of blew up out of the water. Like, and I think that you can, and I think that happens more often than not when people encounter something again that they may or may not know what it is. You see all these stories about it. I also, and again, I'm always willing to believe a witness in what they say. I don't necessarily believe size. Because people are very bad judges of like size. Like, I'm just saying. Like, again, I go back to my grandfather's deer story that he gives all the time. Like, people just suck at it.
Size plus distance plus memory does not always compute super well.
Yeah, I'll challenge anybody all the time, being like, tell me how long that is. We'll go tape measure it. I don't think most people just are experts at being able to gauge that. But anyway, thank you guys so much for the comments. We appreciate it so much. We always say put your guys' thoughts on these episodes below. We'll go over good, bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go over a topic, and hopefully this episode gets put up, because the last time that we tried to talk about this particular episode in the video, the government shut us down, and my computer mysteriously crashed under unknown circumstances.
A little bit of backstory. Back in season 1, forever ago, we decided we were going to pre-record a few videos. And one of them was on this topic, and then boom. Everything shut down, lost everything, and we almost stopped the channel right there. Right. We actually took a long break right after that because we had pre-recorded a lot of episodes, and everything was fully unrecoverable.
Swipe. That was the first time that the Men in Black that was tasked with watching us probably intervened to silence us from putting out something. So we're still to this day suspicious of exactly which one it was. Maybe it was this. We don't know. We're probably going to get into accusing, like we did during the Giants episodes, the Smithsonian and science for covering crap up. I almost did it again. Cover myself up here. So we're going to get a little bit of that. Because today what we're going to talk about this phenomenon of live animals being entombed and found inside of rocks, specifically. But not just rocks, because there's other examples of this phenomenon happening in trees, tree stumps, drywall, concrete, all sorts of weird crap out there. And it's stuff that goes back. I mean, a lot of times when people talk about this particular story, I mean, I think it was 14 times the magazine talked about since the 15th century. There's been like 210 accounts of these that have been recorded, but you can even find accounts of these that even go back further than that. So
yeah, you can find these existing in a lot of older science journals as well as newspapers.
Of people just literally just cracking open generally a rock or some sort of like hard rock substance, and animals pop out, like generally amphibians, sometimes reptiles. I've had an example of a mammal of it happening.
And interestingly enough, alive.
Yeah, and weird. And sometimes encased in rock that's like millions of years old. And sometimes not even just regular animals. Sometimes they're animals that are prehistoric, and sometimes they're giant animals. Like, it's so weird when you fall down the rabbit hole of these. Like, it's so, you know, what was the weirdest thing that I found out about this when I did this? Okay, so like, if you ever like really look up this topic, one of the first things that I thought was weird is if you ever go to the Wikipedia page on this, which a lot of people start when they're looking up something, it's actually pretty short.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, that was one of the things that I thought that was really interesting, was there's really not a whole lot, there was not a whole lot there for a person to sort of start as a frame of reference. They'll do that 14 Times magazine. That example is always quoted in any articles about this to talk about a science study they did, and then they give a couple different examples. And that's really it. But the story goes way, 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 way deeper than that.
It's also a little difficult to research if you don't know the term to look into. So when I started my research, I didn't know the exact term. I just started Googling basically a description of it. I didn't know that the term you need to Google was entombed animals. So I couldn't find anything for quite a bit. So I switched my research to studying things like hibernation. And then halfway through that study, I had stumbled upon the term entombed animal. And make sure if you're doing research, that's my big hint to you. Start with that term. It will save you so much time.
whenever you're looking up stuff about this, absolutely. I mean, it's okay. So I'm really trying to think of where I really want to start when we're breaking this down, because typically what'll happen when you're researching this is you look at an article, and the first thing they'll tell you is about the general phenomena of this, and then it sort of like throws out a couple stories. And I can do that, and I have like just a very, 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 very brief just couple stories about what I'm talking about. Like, for an example, like Benjamin Franklin wrote an account of 4 live toads that were supposedly found encased inside quarried limestone. Remember, they broke it open. There was a gentleman, and it was in 1876, a report from South Africa said that 63 small toads were found in the middle of a 16-foot wide tree trunk. Like, they just opened it up, and they just all started hopping around.
And in that one, just as a note, it was a solid tree trunk. It was not a hollowed tree trunk.
There's an example here from the early 19th century where there was a Julian Huxley that was writing a letter that was talking about that this person that found claimed that they found freed 23 frogs from a single piece of concrete while they were widening a road in Devonshire, England. I mean, you literally just can find examples of this just everywhere.
Yeah, and most of them are not being reported by scientists, although some are. Many of them are being reported by mainly people who work with this stuff. People, like there's one of the stories that comes from England, and they're changing how some of the pipes lay, and they have to dig into the concrete to get to the pipes. And as they're digging, they keep coming across live frogs while they're breaking the concrete.
Oh, my God. Seriously, the biggest reporters of this phenomenon tend to be like builders, like people that work with their hands, like that, which kind of pisses me off when you see the explanation that scientists love to give. Oh, these people, they misidentified what they saw. They were not 100% sure. For some reason, like construction workers don't know what they're talking about when they're like, we broke open a concrete or a rock, and friggin' amphibians started hopping out. Yeah, they don't know what it's like. Yeah, the construction workers don't know what it's like working with rocks. You know, not these scientists from the house.
No. Here's what's happening. They're sneaking in there, and you're just not paying attention. Because you know the number one thing people working with heavy equipment that can kill them do is not pay attention to what's going on.
Oh, my God. It's just so... oh my God. Like, it's one of the most infuriating things that you see in the paranormal when people are talking about that, when scientists just say, people don't know what they're seeing. Like, they don't know. And don't get me wrong, I know that I literally ripped on people not being able to, recognize how tall or how long something is. Okay? But that's a far cry from somebody whose their specific job doesn't know what they're doing. Okay, like that, or somebody who just lives in the area can't recognize something. Like, that's
beyond
big
this
difference.
This isn't strange phenomena occurring at a distance. This is strange phenomena occurring inches from you.
Yeah, like the people cutting down a tree didn't notice the frog, 23 frogs sneakily jumping up inside, when your back was turned. Like, that's the longest friggin' lunch break I've ever seen where they weren't noticing that.
Also, although there have been a handful of experiments done on this, to the best of my knowledge, there are only 2. Like, did you find more than 2? Like, there was one done, and then another one done, and then they had repeated it a bit later. I didn't find more scientific studies on the entombment than that.
Okay, now so the most famous study that people talking about this phenomenon talk about the study from William Buckland. Okay, and this is an English geologist in the 1820s, and he set out to study this phenomenon specifically because you see that with this phenomenon, people just say, "Oh, there's not a whole lot of research done," and they just point to this particular study. So what this guy did was he goes out and he's like, "All right," and he takes sandstone. And then he takes limestone, and then he puts frogs or he puts amphibians inside, and then seals it up, and then buries it. And then what happens is he digs it up like a year later.
I think it's 6 months.
Yeah, he puts it in the ground for a good amount of time. So when he digs them up, what he finds is that all of the ones in the sandstone died. Mm-hmm. And some of the ones in the limestone survived. Most of them had died. Some of them started decaying, but a couple of them had survived the process and were living. And what he had found within the limestone was that some of the cracks had formed, and he found some insects. Actually, what he said, too, was a couple of the frogs in there had actually even gained weight. Now, to be fair, they may have been eating some of the frogs in there. I mean, what happened? I don't know. I didn't read that. I didn't see that far into his study.
I think there was only one frog in each tomb.
Yeah. No, he had multiple frogs.
Was it multiple? I might have misread that because I read the other site too. And I think the other one was the one in plaster. And I think that was just
no. He had a couple. No.
Oh, okay. I mean, it's definitely not odd for, especially if you use toads. Toads engage in cannibalism very quickly.
And so so what he did was they were toads. Specifically, I'm looking at my notes. So they were toads. So what his takeaway from it was that he found insects inside the limestone where the cracks had formed. And so what he had said was the ones in the sandstone all died because it was sealed, and that was the reason, and nothing could get in there, and that's the reason why they all died. So the fact that there were cracks and limestone's porous, that was what was able to allow insects and crap to get inside there for them to be able to survive. A couple of them to be able to survive for, I think it was the full year or whatever that they were down in there.
And I think he did repeat the study again though. Mm-hmm. And in this one he made sure there weren't cracks in the limestone, and supposedly all of them died.
Mm-hmm. But limestone is a common rock that seems to be found throughout a lot of the examples of people finding these things inside it, or some sort of porous-y type rock. Because even concrete can be sealed, although there's some cracks that can be formed in. But anyway, but limestone's pretty porous-y. And that, I think, could be probably one of the best explanations for this phenomenon, because they talk about insects being able to get inside of there for some of these, like frogs and stuff, to be able to live on.
But what year was this study done in?
1820-something.
And I think that's where a lot of his flaws come from. I've done a lot of research into this over the week.
Are you just saying his flaws was that this was in the 1820s?
Your
flaws just time period?
There were there's mechanisms that have been discovered about many animals that were not known at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the crux of the matter is going to come in. But I'm going to hold off till a little later before I elaborate on it. I was to get into some of the stories, because there's little details hidden in the stories that kind of lead me to a conclusion.
Oh yeah, there's some wild stories that come from about this. Like one of my favorite, one of the most recent ones examples that people always throw out is they talk about it was down in Texas.
Is it Rip?
Yeah.
I love Rip.
Yeah, the turtle that was found when they were working.
No, that's not Rip. Rip is the horny toad, but it was also in Texas.
No. Yeah, the turtle that was found whenever they were. I think it was concrete was what they were working on, and they survived, but it died a couple days later. Whenever that was one of the ones examples that it died after they let it out or whatever that they found in there. There was another interesting one that I thought was funny. And this was an example of an insect, because they said whenever King Tut's tomb that was opened up. One of the guy that explored it, the guy that opened up, his associate that died from it, they claimed that he died from a mosquito that was hundreds of years old. That was thousands of years old from it. Another fun one that I thought that was interesting too was the mouse that they found in one.
Yeah, this is one of the most recent ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a mouse that was inside of it was a tree trunk, and that popped out, and then that crawled out of it, which I thought was really interesting too.
And I think that's the only example of a
mammal. Yeah, that's the only example of a mammal that I've been able to find the entire time of doing this.
I didn't see any.
Like
others
it always goes in the order of like amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and then I think insects just naturally can be inside. So I've only been able to see like one but they couldn't really technically prove.
Rip, I don't have the date on it, but it was one of the most recent ones. Rip was a horny toad, which so many people writing on this, and this is a pet peeve of mine, kept identifying horny toads as a type of amphibian. They are not. They are lizards. Trust me, they are not amphibians. But basically, they decide that they're going to do a time capsule, and they're going to open it up 30 years later. They pack a bunch of things in there, and for some reason, a guy throws in a live horned toad. Mm-hmm. For reasons, probably, I don't really get why they did that. So they seal it up, and then 30 years later, they open it up, and all the things are in there, and they're holding up the dead horned toad, and they're moving it around, and it's all stiff. And then a few minutes later, it stops being stiff and starts moving. After 30 years of being sealed up.
I mean, and it's just so interesting. Like, the only other example that I've ever seen of people trying to give explanations to this that's even slightly scientific is talking about people not being able to identify the type of stone that they found. So that instead of it actually being like stone, it's more like mud. So what you're seeing like some of these things literally getting into mud or something, and then it hardens for some sort of reason, and then actually what's being broken open is mud and these things popping out and walking around. And it wasn't as encased as what people think that it actually was.
Actually, if we want to start cracking into some scientific explanations, I think I'm ready.
Sure.
Okay. First, what is definitely not happening here, it's not hibernation. It is. I'm first going to throw that out there. What is occurring is not hibernation. Hibernation is basically a process by which mainly mammals, but many other animals as well, basically go through this sleeping period where they're going in and out of a process called torpor. Torpor actually is. I'm going to retract a little bit. It's a common misconception that it's sleeping, but it's not sleeping. When you're in torpor, you are not asleep. You are in this state in between being awake and asleep, and your body processes are reduced to an extreme level. You actually stir periodically from torpor, and there's parts where you have to come out of torpor to sleep. But basically, it tones down how much your body is expending to give you a longer amount of time without having to do it. That's why most animals gorge first.
A real life example of this is, say, like your dad watching TV and he closes his eyes. He's not really asleep like the whole time. That's why whenever you touch the remote and you change the show, he goes, I was watching that. I wasn't sleeping. Like, that's probably the closest to a real life example if you see that as for humans.
But like most animals, at least somewhat stir from torpor every couple days. They usually will just readjust and go right back into torpor or switch to sleeping. Because, the brain still needs sleep. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it kind of takes you into a low maintenance mode. Mm-hmm. But that is definitely not what's happening here. Hibernation would not allow for these periods of time to occur. Also, you're not totally unconscious when you're doing it. You still need to move, and you still need to hit certain things for living. Also, the process doesn't bring your biology down low enough to make it so you did not have to eat for that long of a period of time. I think that's why you don't see these cases with mammals often. But there are other mechanisms that have been discovered that could achieve something like this. And I'm probably going to mispronounce them. I've learned all these terms in the last week, guys, but so bear with me. If there's a biologist out there and I make an error, please correct me in the comments below. But cryptobiosis is one that could possibly explain it. Cryptobiosis is way beyond torpor. Basically, when going through the process of cryptobiosis, which is usually possessed by reptiles, amphibians, cephalopods, insects, those are mainly the things that we see doing it. Your body functions drop so low that scientifically it would be considered dead. Basically, your body stops healing itself, your brain functions stop, your circulatory system stops, all the markers that we normally use to consider something alive have at this point ceased to be. Except for there's basically just enough biology going on in there that your body is looking for a trigger. Like, say, if you go into cryptobiosis because of drought, which is a really common one that triggers cryptobiosis in, like, say, snails and frogs, your body is just waiting for a trigger of wetness. Once that wetness hits, your body starts to slowly turn back on and activate, basically waking from death. It's arguable on if a creature in the process of cryptobiosis should even be considered alive or in a state of temporary death. You look like you wanted to chime in.
No, like my only real argument that I would throw against that is if you look at a lot of these stories of animals in which when they've popped out, shortly after that though, a lot of them die. So I think if that's some sort of like natural evolution for some sort of like creatures, like they would have been able to, more of them would be able to survive this process of waking up. And most scientists claim that, oh, well, the reason about why this may happen is, being exposed to that much fresh air and sunshine caused them to just keel over because it's too much stimulus.
Well, yes, it could be shock. But the thing is, there's other things. Most animals are not made to sustain cryptobiosis for an extremely prolonged period of time. The thing is, your body's not maintaining your cellular structure. For the most part, you could rot while you're in this state. But think about it, if you're in a state where you're already entombed, fully sealed pretty much in rock, the normal processes by which bacteria would break you down is not going to be optimally working. But the thing is this, you're still going through cellular degeneration because your body's not upkeeping your cells well. Likely, if you've been in this, say, for, let's say, 40 years, this creature's been entombed in 40 years and went into cryptobiosis for 40 years. That is way longer than what you're supposed to be able to sustain with it. When you wake up, you probably are going to be able to move around for a while, but there's already trauma done to the cells. It's probably just not going to live long. And some of the things that are kind of markers of this that you see, a lot of people describe that when the animal is found, its color is drastically reduced from normal. That's a lot paler than it. And when you say look at a wood frog that's going through cryptobiosis, it is usually much paler. And that's true for most animals. If you look at, like, say, a common one we can talk about is brine shrimp. And this is freaking amazing. Brine shrimp, when you dry them out and just leave them there, they curl up, they turn to these white husks and kind of turn in on themselves, but they're not dead. They will, by all accounts, they look dead. And you can have them that way for about as long as you want. But then you dunk them in water in the right sort of conditions, they start to twitch, they start to regain their color, going from a pale white back to a natural color, and they start kicking around.
Point of order, I would like to bring up, Vic seems to be avoiding the obvious thing, which is, how the F did these things get in limestone in the first place?
Okay, limestone.
But I do get your point. I do think that there's probably some sort of underlying biological function that's probably going on that we probably have not studied within amphibians and reptiles that we just don't get.
Okay, I'm going to stop to answer your question real quick.
Right. Because you're talking about formation of limestone, because limestone forms underwater. And I'm pretty sure it takes millions of years for it to form. And that's so anything being trapped in there has had to have been in there for a very long period of time. And even so, some of these things, which are weird, some of these species haven't even existed during that time, too, for some ones that have popped out.
Okay. For how do they get in there? For limestone, it's not a super hard reach because it's going to happen probably in a similar way that it did with concrete, where the animal got in it where it's wet. Limestone can break up into kind of particulates, and then a rainfall comes, and it's kind of this sludge of limestone where the water's carrying a lot of it. It washes up an animal, then as it dries, it's basically encased in there. Probably for concrete, it's while it's moving around. Sandstone, I'm not sure because I don't know enough about sandstone. But interestingly enough, almost all the rocks that this is reported in are rocks that can contain salt or can allow salt to permeate in, which brings me to another possibility, estivation. I know I was going to get it. Estivation is basically, it's often used in situations where you need to change your body chemistry to better suit an adverse situation and works similar to torpor. But it kind of allows you to, once again, reach that brink of death. But estivation often does require salt, which most of these stones, you can get them through. But there's one other detail that would lean towards either estivation or cryptobiosis. When we're talking about frogs, a common thing mentioned in the details is that it had this film over it. It had this yellowish film, or the frog's mouth wouldn't open anymore. It's like the mouth had sealed shut. Many amphibians, when in a state of survival, can release this this mucus that they normally use to keep their skin moist. They can kind of encase themselves in it and allow it to harden. The idea is that the hard mucus will seal in all their liquids and keep them from drying out. So when I see them say, oh, it had this weird film on, or, oh, it couldn't really open its mouth, it's like there was this yellowish thing that sealed the mouth shut. That makes me think it has to be doing that. It's the only mechanism I can think for a frog to do that. And you also don't find these details mentioned when you're talking about reptiles, which can't do it. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that there are definitely biological mechanisms occurring here. Now, wood, I can't explain how they got in wood. I've got no clue.
Because, again, I still go back to the limestone thing, because even though you're talking about that, where they'll rush in and do that, but some of these things are being found like 10, 15 feet underground. Like, I don't necessarily, like, again, that means that these things had to have been down there for, like, you know, for a very extensive period of time for these to happen, not just one single rainfall that got down there. And so that's one of my things so these things have had to have been down there for a very, 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 very long period of time.
And it's possible because, especially with some of them where, like there's one where they found 3 salamanders and the biologist who was studying them said these aren't salamanders that live today. So on some of them, I think you're right, but also you have to remember water will flow to its lowest point. So it's naturally going to be drugged down to deeper substratus if it's like, say, a rush of water dragging animals. But I also think there's situations where you're 100% correct. I don't think it explains every case.
No, I don't think that it does.
It definitely doesn't explain wood, because wood doesn't work
like it just sort of sat there, like it's just like these things are just sitting there and the tree just grows up all around it, and so the frog's natural response is not to move away. It's just oh no, I'm gonna go into this weird hibernative torpor state just to protect myself from this tree growing around me, just hoping nothing gets me.
Like plant biology, I only did mediocre in botany. My only thought would be maybe the tree at one point had a cavern, that animals then entered the cavern, and then the cavern healed over. Mm-hmm. I don't think that makes much sense, but maybe this is a thing. Someone who's a botanist can tell me why I'm wrong there, because I feel like I'm probably wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think that's just one of the weird, like they talk about like just having these, when they talk about coming out of trees, they really talk about it like that it's just encased inside the tree. Not like there's this weird path that they can go to just encased in solid wood that's just rocks, like I'm a rock solid, like tree solid. So I just find that weird.
But if I remember right, wood can heal itself. It can fill in those crevices.
Like it can, but you're talking about an animal that would just wait? Like, I mean, it's not going to fill it that fast.
Well, once again, I'm kind of reaching for straws here. But like, say, a frog tries to get into a crevice of a tree. It falls in such a way it can't climb out, but bugs are still coming in. Slowly over time, it sustains itself all the bugs while the tree is healing, and eventually it heals around the frog.
Yeah, I think that's how they survive.
Kind of a guess.
I think that's how they survive. I think that's a real thing that I think when people are saying that's probably fully encased, there may or may not be more examples in which, I mean, bugs are very, they're very innovative for getting wherever they want to be. I mean, they can burrow, they can get in there, they can get in all sorts of places. So if there's a path to get in there, these bugs are going to be able to find it. And then it's probably how they're getting eaten and probably how they're surviving. Like if you look at like a Buckland study. So I think that may be what's going on.
Oh, I know. They have to be going into some sort of sleep because there's no way they're getting consistent nutrients, water, and air. Oh, yeah. Sure. Some of them.
Yeah.
Because like...
Or how much air that they actually need. But
it sounds like these things are pretty heavily encased. And in the case of amphibians, if you cover up all their skin, they can't breathe no more. And it really seems like a lot of them, particularly with amphibians, they're fully encased.
And then they just croak out.
Yeah, I think it has to be they're entering some sort of cryptobiosis, estivation, something that allows them to bring their body functions down to the brink of death.
I want to ask you this because this is something that is never brought up in any of these articles. They're never brought up in anything. why do you think that the scientific community does not study this? Because that's one of the things that I throw out there. Because if I'm seeing something, like, keep in mind, like, if I'm an amphibian or if I'm a reptile biologist, to me, this seems like a cool thing to look at. Like, even if it doesn't work, this just seems like this would be like an interesting field just to look at for the sole purpose of that, of can amphibians or reptiles or something survive like in this deep stasis type field. Now, granted, though, I mean, I don't know if I want to go that far where I'm like burying things alive. That seems kind of like a sadist move, but I don't want to do that. But
well, my first thought is this was mainly going on around the Victorian era, and spoiler alert: Victorian era scientists weren't always really great. Like, are you familiar with the story of Piltdown Man?
no.
It's where a bunch of Victorian era scientists and the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes is involved in it for some reason, decides we want to establish that human life started in England, and the way we're going to do that is stage a body.
No, I know what you're talking about now. But I don't think that addresses what I'm talking about. Like, now is what I'm saying. Like, because these stories have not gone anywhere. Is what I'm saying. Like, it's swept under. It's just sort of this pseudoscience-y thing that's not accurate. Now, granted, one of the things that I find really weird about this in a lot of these stories is even ones that survive or ones that have put up on display. You know, the weird thing is they just happen to disappear.
Oh yeah, like the horned toad was stolen like 3 times and returned 3 times.
Yeah, so like, that's like even examples of it's one of 3 things: either A, they hopped away, nobody stopped anything; the taxidermied carcass or whatever they had disappears. Or it's taken for study, never seen again. Like, that's one of those
kind of like giants.
Yeah. So it's kind of like one of those deals in which there's rarely evidence that's ever left of it. So I don't know if just people are just saying, oh, that's why, they're just making this stuff up, or like that. To me, that seems like it's weird that you wouldn't even study this for the purpose of trying to, I don't know, get to the bottom of what's going on here. They're just gonna write it off as people just don't know what they're seeing.
I think most modern biologists aren't even really that aware of this. I think they're taught that it's a pseudoscience and you don't need to worry about it, because like you don't hear about these making the news nowadays. Now the thing is, like, one of the things I was thinking about, this would be an easy experiment to do. It would be very easy, especially with our modern technology, to do this. You just would have to have some minor funding and a willingness to be mean to some animals.
Well, I think that the last major time this hit the news was in the 70s. Like, the last time that the major story this happened. But I don't think that's entirely true that this doesn't make the news, because that hammer that was found in rocks or whatever people love to cart around, that's been thrown out. I mean, it's not the exact same. I mean, it's sort of in the same genre of, like, you have something that's encased in rock that should not be encased on the type of rock that it is. And then people go out trying to debunk it or give explanations to it. But you see this similar thing with live animals. To me, I don't even think that's as strong of a leap of why biologists wouldn't even want to examine this type of a phenomenon. I bet they do. I bet that they do. I bet that they have heard of this phenomenon before.
I mean, probably some of them have heard of it, but they're probably relying on the fact that it was debunked in the Victorian era, and they're not examining what problems were there with that experiment. That perhaps the experiment would be worth repeating because there's so many potential errors in how it was done. And personally, I think that it would be worth repeating because this would prove that, like, say, either estivation or cryptobiosis could go way beyond where we currently think the limits are. But I think there's no one really taking these stories very seriously in the field of biology right now. Also, like, I kind of feel like this is going to be something hard to get funding for. Like, say, if you're applying for a grant and you're like, oh, hey, I'm going to retest this thing that's pseudoscience compared to someone else who's doing something that might go more towards medical research.
You don't think?
I feel like you're probably not going to get your grant.
I don't think that's true. First of all, there is tons of grants for, like, really crappy things that get funded all the time. And if someone came to me and said, hey, I want to look at, like hibernation, like torpor-esque studies in amphibians, I don't think that's that far of a stretch for people to get funding for a study like that. I don't think that it is. I don't think that's as much pseudoscience as you're claiming.
Well,
I don't
people
think that's fair.
categorize it nowadays as pseudoscience.
Yeah, they categorize that as pseudoscience.
No. There's studies on things like torpor, and there's studies on these mechanisms. but they're not connected to, like, say animal entombment. So they're not looking at these long stays well encased in rock. Because another possibility is maybe a animal normally could not do it. Like, let's say you have a frog that enters cryptobiosis just here on the surface for no reason. And it just sits there. It's going to desiccate out. It's going to get eaten by bacteria. And it's just going to turn to bones over the course of, like, say, 40 years. But if you take that same frog and put it in stone, it has a lot of protection now from the environment. It has a lot of protection from being dried out. It has a lot of protection from bacteria. Basically, it has the bacteria that's already on it. It has the liquid that's going to be in there because it's not going to evaporate out through normal means. Maybe this is something that can only occur while fully entombed in stone.
Well, I mean, it seems to be a popular thing amongst people in the paranormal that look at this, about when you look at things encased in rock that are supposedly, according to modern science, as much as we know it, are millions of years old. But anything that may be able to test or challenge that or anything like that sort of gets met with, like, crap disappears, people are told to be quiet, people are hushed, all sorts of things that this creeps up. I mean, we saw the same thing. We saw the same thing when we popped up with giants. You'll see young Earth creationists that bring up all the time whenever they talk about trying to bring this stuff up. I mean, you'll see something that whenever, if it ever challenges this sort of, like, understanding of stuff like that people seem to just get real bulky at that and disappear.
I have noticed something. We have not talked about the pterodactyl yet. Are we going to say that for the patron segment?
Yeah. We'll bring up the largest example of one of those. We can bring up that.
Then can I go first on my final thoughts?
Sure.
I did a full 180 on this phenomena.
Oh, sure.
I'm pretty sure last week I said there's no mechanism of science that can explain this. And I was incorrect. I think that this is explainable phenomena that has, for the most part, been ignored. Now, does it push the boundaries of how we know these mechanisms work? Yes. This is us taking known mechanisms that exist within these animals and extrapolating quite a bit on them. But we're also talking about very specific circumstances that I think lend to that happening. I think it's worth studying this because I think there is a high possibility that this is explainable phenomena.
Mm-hmm. I think this is a phenomenon that falls into a similar genre of stuff that comes out in the early 18th, 19th century type stuff, where people, they have these things which are supposed to go against all modern science or all modern stuff, that biology that we understand, and then magically disappears later. We saw this with giants. We've seen some of this stuff with cryptids that have popped up, and then just stuff just sort of disappears over the course of time. I think you can write that off. I think you can write that off to sometimes just the bad, organization of science back in the day. Up till now, I think maybe we've gotten better. You could write it some sort of massive conspiracy for just trying to keep the truth hidden, whatever you want to believe. People are just going to believe whatever they want to believe. Me personally, I think that there's probably an I agree with Vic that I think that there's an underlying biological function that's going on that's just not been studied. I think that we probably understand the natural world a lot less than what we think we do. And we're always discovering new and phenomenal things. And so I think this is a really interesting example of that. But let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you guys think that it's just this underlying biological function that we don't understand? Do you think that it's the Smithsonian science covering stuff up? They're just stealing stuff so we don't get to the real truth. We didn't even get to some of the other stuff where it's examples of the biblical flood. I've seen people claim it's the Illuminati or other stuff like that. God just putting it there as some sort of miracle. I've heard that example before. We didn't really super get into any of those examples because it's really hard to back those up. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. Again, if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, hit subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you guys can stay up to date whenever we put out new content. But until next time, guys, keep believing.
Because we'll keep listening.
All right, guys, we're going to slide into the Pillow Talk segment of this podcast. If you want to check out the rest of the awesome podcast, all you got to do is go over to our Patreon and sign up. For as little as $1 a month, you get the rest of this awesome podcast, as well as bonus episodes that we put up exclusively for our patrons. And if you send for $2 more of a month, you actually get access to our poll to vote on the theme for next month. So for this month of July, I know we're the beginning of it, but we wanted to do this episode because we did on Entombed Living Animals. But for July, we're actually going to do Underwater Phenomenon, which was voted for May, but we're going to do it here in July. But we're going to put out the poll for August, and we're going to add Nuclear Paranormal Phenomenon to the poll. So the options are going to be Nuclear Paranormal Phenomenon, Past Life Experiences, Famous Paranormal Investigators, and the Apocalypse. So go over to our Patreon. Ooh, I know.
I'm also so excited about Famous Paranormal Investigators.
It is. So go over to our Patreon and sign up and let your voices be heard. So, all right, guys, we're going to go for a little bit longer. We're going to talk about another interesting case.
Actually, the most interesting
most interesting case, I would say, involving something coming out of rock living. So this story comes out of 1856. Out of Illustrated London News, specifically is where it comes from. So supposedly in 1856, in Calmont, France, some construction workers were working on building a recent excavation of a new railway tunnel.